Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this work session of the Washington County Board of Education. We do have 6 board members present, so we do have a quorum. This is a work session. It is for the purpose of receiving information for discussion. There will be no formal action taken. We have one agenda item, and that is discussion of the 2022 Educational Facilities Master Plan update. So I'll turn things over to Dr. Michael, and he will introduce staff.
Okay, thank you, President Williams, board members. Today we're here in work session to discuss the 2022 Educational Facilities Master Plan. As staff will describe to you, this is an annual process we go through. There'll be other sister documents or companion documents to this in the fall. Comprehensive Maintenance Plan, our CIP requests to the state and county will kind of mirror some of this. This is part of our long-range planning for facilities masters, for our plan for systemic projects as well as construction projects. The board's well aware that we're not really in a very good position to construct new schools, and I'll describe a little bit of the challenge of that. We do have one school planned for construction, and it's still another year away before we, completely commit to that and push away from the dock. And staff will describe that this afternoon, also describe the caution that I've shared with them, that we want to make sure if we're only building one new school in the next several years, that we pick the right school to construct. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Prue.
Thank you, Dr. Michael, Mrs. Williams, staff and members of the board. With me today is Rob Rollins, Director of Facilities Planning and Development, and Chad Criswell, Senior Project Manager and Planning Supervisor. The Facilities Committee got an opportunity to review this PowerPoint and to talk about the EFMP, the Facilities Master Plan, last week at its meeting. And as Dr. Michael mentioned here on our first slide are a number of the items. And I want to talk quickly about what the EFMP is. It's got several chapters. Dictated by the state as to what's to be included in that. But through the EFMP process, we evaluate our community, looking at where our developments are, what are new developments, what developments are fully built out, which then leads also to a review of our enrollment projections, which are also balanced with our private partner, Public Pathways, but also balanced against what the Maryland Department of Planning is projecting for enrollment. We also review our facility inventory to do an updated assessment of how each building is performing and how each of the systems are performing, and also review our board policies. It is, as Dr. Michael mentioned, this plan is updated annually. So as we move forward, as information changes, as enrollment changes, as developments change, we have the opportunity to always step back, to move projects forward, to move projects further back as we move to the capital improvement project, which we'll present to you in the fall. It's always presented to you in a fiscally responsible plan of how we think we can get the best bang for the dollar for Washington County and for the students of Washington County. And it is the basis of our 5-year capital plan. However, whatever document we push forward with at this point, we'll then, we're going to present some project ideas to you today. As we move into the capital plan, we'll actually put dollars to those projects and give you a sense of what the funding constraints will be to those projects as we move forward to the CIP in September. So with that, I think I'm going to hand the clicker over to Rob, and we'll walk you through the rest of the presentation.
Already got to the next one. Okay, we always like to start off by talking a little bit about our current infrastructure and any changes that we've had. So our land area has increased by 4 acres with the land that we acquired from the county commissioners to build the diesel project at Tech High. Remember, there was a little change in the land there. I think we gave the county a little bit of land, and they gave us some back. And anyway, it was a net 4-acre gain for Washington County Public Schools. And our building area has increased by about 12,500 square feet via the addition that's going on at Tech High, the cafeteria addition that's happening now at South High, and the 2,000 square foot at Boonesboro High School as part of the auditorium addition. I went the wrong way. There we go. We always talk also about our ideal preventive maintenance program. We have 47 buildings. We have 47 roofs, our boilers, chillers, HVAC systems, and the number of years that we expect each of those to last. generally speaking. These numbers are rules of thumb. It's sort of like you want to get ahead of maintenance and stay ahead of maintenance. It's sort of like changing the tires on your car. You know that you don't want to wait for the tires to blow before you change them. So we use these industry standards that when we take a strong look at when to replace a boiler, when to replace a chiller, if there's no issues with it. If there are issues with it, we may need to replace it sooner. And certainly when we can, we always extend the life of these if they're operating well and we don't see any major issues. Of course, we always draw attention to the building lifespan of around 50 years, which means if we were replacing our schools, we'd need to replace or renovate them at least one per year to age them out at 50 years. I want to make sure everybody understands when we talk about replacing schools, we're talking not just about tearing it down necessarily or building it on a new site somewhere and getting rid of that school. Sometimes we can also modernize them, renovate them. We did a bunch of schools in the 90s and in the first decade of the 2000s with elementary schools, Salem Avenue, Williamsport, Smithsburg Elementary, Lincolnshire Elementary, where we rebuilt those schools, renovated them. They still have the bones of their older than a 50-year-old school. So we do take that into account. And sometimes it makes sense to replace a school, and sometimes it makes sense to renovate it. We always look at that. And if one per year seems aggressive and something that can't be done, say we wanted to try to extend our schools to 75 years before we renovated them, it would still mean you'd have to do 2 schools every 3 years. That in itself sounds aggressive. If we were to go to 100 years, it would be 1 every 2 years. We're not keeping up that pace right now with the funds that we have available. So I just want to let everybody understand what that means. A few facts. 25 of our 47 schools have adjusted ages of 50 years, have adjusted ages of 50 years or more in the next 10 years without having the benefit of a comprehensive renovation or replacement. Just so everybody understands what the adjusted age is, that is not when the school was built, that's when it was last renovated. So say a school that was renovated in 2000 would only be 22 years old this year. Even if it was originally built in the 50s, we would consider that school to be 22 years old at this point in time. Likewise, if we put an addition on a school, let's use Barbara Ingram as an example. The first school was built in 2009. The addition that we just did was opened in 2020. The adjusted age of those combined facilities is 2016, so it's only 6 years old. So when we put an addition on a school, it raises the age, shortens the age, makes the building younger as prorated on square footage. So in the next 10 years, the average adjusted age for all WCPS facilities will be 45 years. 8 schools right now are already 50 years old. 17 will turn over this next decade. They built a lot of schools in the 70s, and so those are all coming down the pike. In the same time frame, just to also prove the point that we do preserve our older schools, 36 facilities, 75% of our buildings have exceeded 50 years in age since when they were originally constructed. So again, those schools like Boonesboro, Salem, Smithsburg, Lincolnshire, Clear Spring Elementary Schools, North High, South High, those were all built in the 50s and renovated in the 90s and the 2000s over that period of time to bring them up to date. Are going to need to do, the school system, the county is going to need to do that to our schools that were built in the 70s as they are turning 50 and older. The longer we take, the older they're going to get. So we really need to start seriously hitting some of those. In prior EFMPs, we've identified a program of consolidation and replacement of these facilities, but thus far, the Board of County Commissioners' annual CIP funding levels have not supported doing whole school replacements, renovations, or the construction of new school buildings. So also I think it's important to point out that the money that the state puts forward would not be enough to rebuild 17 schools over the next 10 or 20 years either. So that if we embarked on an aggressive school construction program, if the county entertained funding that, Some of those schools may have to be built totally on the local dime unless the state changes its funding model too. So it's not just local money that might be lacking in order to keep up. It's also money from the state. For that, I'm going to turn over the presentation to Chad to talk about some of the other aspects of the facility master plan.
I went the wrong way, too. Well, thank you, Rob. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what's in the Educational Facility Master Plan. Chapter 2 is really a community analysis. I put a couple different charts that we include in that chapter in here just to kind of touch on a few things. The first is obviously the picture of the county to the left. Now, we changed that this year. We used to just look at the active and the inactive developments. But I started noticing, boy, these things kind of complete out. We thought it would be important to start showing which developments had all the permits issued and would be coming off the map too. So that's why there's a third color on there this year. And of course, that's the major developments. That's anything that's as defined by the Adequate Public Facility Ordinance that has 7 or more dwelling units within that subdivision is shown on here. So of course, we go through all this information with Joe Baker at the county and the other municipalities within the various areas of the county as well, including the city of Hagerstown, town of Boonesboro, everyone else. But these maps are all found within the document. This, of course, the developments in Washington County is on page 11 of that chapter. The new housing starts, which is kind of on the upper right-hand corner, we're about 50 more new housing starts in 2021 than we were in 2020. I'm going to be anxious to see what next year holds, to see if we're even more or if we're staying kind of flat. I would kind of expected to see it maybe come up a little bit based on some of the proposed developments that we've been hearing about, we've been sharing with the facility committee. So I'm going to be anxious to see what next year holds for new housing starts. And then the bottom right chart is new this year. I'm a bit of a numbers nerd. And every year I like to look at the census data and put a little blurb in our Chapter 2 about the community to see where population has been estimated by the Census Bureau. And I thought this table was kind of neat to show what the last 10-year growth of the county was, just to start including and recording and paying attention to as we move forward. So that's new this year. Again, it's probably more for me than anybody else if anyone would read it. It just was kind of fun to look to see that, the county's been estimated to have grown by about 6,600 people in the last 10 years. So we'll keep an eye on that and use that in future analyses as we expand that data. As we go through, starting on page 17, we start looking at the individual high school service areas. And here's where we break down those major developments. We show where they are within those high school service areas. We give you the total number of units, the units in concept phase, and then the number that have permits or don't have permits. And again, this is all information that we update the facility committee with as it becomes available. But this is where it's all kind of cataloged and marked as final for the year, and then as we start updating it for the following year. Enrollment projections start in Chapter 4. They're really done in conjunction with Deanna Newman of Public Pathways Incorporated. We go through, we create draft projections, we review them at a staff level, then we go out, we get feedback from principals at every high school within the county. We then take that information, as Mr. Pruitt indicated, submit it to the Maryland Department of Planning. Last week, we just received their approval. So they have agreed with our projections. And we have included a 2-page sheet. It's actually this one. We give it to you guys every year. This is the sheet I carry with me everywhere because I use it all the time. Now, as projections go out, obviously they become a little bit less accurate. We're a little bit more confident about what we're seeing for next year versus what we're seeing for 10 years. But as we go through Chapter 4, we talk about the projections a little bit. We look at how we create those projections. We talk about birth rates. This is kind of an interesting thing to look at. So, for Washington County, 5 years ago, we had, let's read it here, 1,722 births in 2016. This year, we had 1,508 kindergartners show up. That's around an 88% survivorship ratio. Now, that's a little lower than what we typically see. We're normally between 0.89 all the way up to 101%. And I think we're going to expect it to come back up as we move forward. Last year with the pandemic, we were down like 85%. But I think we're going to start to see that come back up. I've talked to some other counties within the state. I've talked to Deanna about this, and we do think we're going to see that number start to rise. And I hope we're correct. We're projecting that for next year. but we are expecting the enrollment at the elementary level to come up as well as the middle and high schools. And while these charts are in Chapter 4, it's a little easier to kind of look at the numbers graph, in my opinion, to kind of see where we're going to be. And next year, we're expecting to be up by around 200 pre-K to 5 students. We're going to be roughly flat at the middle school level. We think we're going to be up by maybe 25, and then a little over 100 students at the high school level. So overall, we're expecting to be up by around 350 students next year. As we look out 10 years, and again, this is where we're not really as solid. This can change, but right now we're projecting to be about 1,700 students, 1,800 students more than what we were this past year at our schools. And the majority of that we're thinking will be in the elementary level. Now, going back and looking to pre-COVID dates, we're really only about half. We're looking to recover, and we're looking to increase by maybe 1,000 students or so from where we were a year ago. And again, talking with the other counties within the state of Maryland, we're all seeing this slow push as students come back to the schools. We've seen a little bit of a push here in March. We saw, 100 and some student growth just between September and March, and we think that's going to carry into next year, and we think it's certainly going to carry in quicker in the following years. The question becomes as expendable income maybe becomes less, do we see more people leave private schools and come back to the public sector? Does that bump that recovery up quicker? There's several factors that I wish I could predict, and we're making assumptions, but I think they're fairly safe assumptions. And again, we feel pretty confident in what we're looking at for next year.
Okay, so based on the data that we collect throughout the entire EFMP and based on what we believe the funding that will be available, hopefully, we put together a list of systemic renovation projects that we think would be good to get done this year using state and local money. There's 3 electrical distribution projects, 2 boilers, a chiller, and 1 HVAC project, 7 in total. All of those, you can look at the age of the components, and all of them have met or well exceeded their planned lifespan, which is a testimony to the maintenance department's efforts to keep everything running. They do a great job, but these are the projects that we think are most in need. We look at not only the age, but we look at how they're operating. We get input from the maintenance department. They tell us what they're having the most problems with, and those are the ones that we target. Also, for several years, we've talked about built-to-learn funding being available from the state, and the state's desire to use that money to build or replace schools or renovate schools. So we're recommending in this year's EFMP, as Dr. Michael alluded to construct a new elementary school that would replace and consolidate Fountain Rock Elementary and Hickory Elementary. We'd have a 628-seat capacity. That's 4 classes per grade, a 4-round school, plus pre-K and all the other amenities that we put in our new schools. And we would propose to construct it right out here on CES property where we have already have public utilities available, and we have the land, so there's no additional cost for that. The school would open in the school year 27-28. It takes a good amount of time to plan, get this funding aligned, especially with Built to Learn. There are some hoops we have to jump through to use that money. So that's a doable timeline there. Funding from BTL comes from the Maryland Stadium Authority. They have the authority to float bonds to fund schools. There's ranges in this funding because it hasn't been completely finalized exactly how much money the Stadium Authority will be able to get bonded. So we could be between 22 and 24 million. We'd also need a little bit of supplemental money from the State Capital Improvement Program in the years that we'd be constructing. And locally, the local CIP, we'd need about $15 million. $4 million of that has already been allocated and set aside by the Board of County Commissioners. So it's 11 more that we would need based on what we think the building will cost. Right now, the state pays 79% of eligible construction costs on a project, and the local money pays 21%. That's just on construction. If you do the math with the numbers you saw above, you won't get to 79 and 21, but Those numbers are based on the cost of construction, not the soft costs like the architect, land, furniture, and equipment, things like that. We have the possibility, there's a new state law this year, HB 1290, that has in it a stipulation that if a LEA can reduce the total cost of ownership of a newly constructed building by 15%, they would raise the state share of funding by 5%. So what does that mean? The total cost of ownership is not only the cost of construction, it's the cost of operating it. So if we think we can meet that goal of 15%, hopefully, and we're going to take a hard look at it. The fact that we're building one school to replace two should lower operating costs, should be more efficient, should greatly lower the cost of construction. So we think that comparing constructing two new schools in two locations against constructing one school in one location, that we can meet that 15% goal and actually get more state funding for this project. It remains to be seen. We have to go through the numbers, and that's why having you approve this plan, we'll start running all those numbers and figuring out what it is that we can get out of the state and local funding.
And if I can interject, Robert, as you can imagine, it's a brand-new bill just passing this legislative session. We've begun some discussions with staff at the IAC, the Interagency Commission on School Construction, and they have given favorable responses to that they think we would be eligible. But again, needing to run the numbers, and they need to create the regulation behind the law. So there's some work to be done there.
So, Mr. Rollins, is your understanding with this new law, if the LEA can reduce the cost by what you said, 15%, is it something that you have to apply for and be granted, or it's a given that you will get that 5% additional from the state?
So the law is written and the regulations haven't been completely written as to exactly what it means. It's part of what we're going to have to go through. But my understanding is that, yes, we'll apply and show them based on our design and what we intend to do, that we think it'll be 15% less. And I'm sure we'll have to show the numbers, compare how much to construct one school and a second school versus constructing one. We would do all those comparisons, and if we can prove ahead of time that we think it will cost less than 15%, they will give us 5% more in funding.
Okay. So I guess my question is more, not that we can prove it, but that we're in competition for that limited amount of money coming from the state with other school systems.
I don't think we're in competition. I think
Okay.
they'll do it to any school system that can do
Okay.
it. So I'm sorry, it's not a competitive grant situation.
Gotcha.
If any LEA can do it, they will. The catch in it is they do want to look at how you operate the school afterwards. And if you can't make good on your promises, they do have the threat of pulling the money back. So you have to actually design it in the right way and then operate it in the right way. I don't know how many years afterwards they'll look at it to prove it. I don't think it'll be that long. And we really just don't know yet exactly what that program is going to completely look like. I just know that it's out there and I want to try to go for it.
Is there any expectation as to when these regulations will be completed, so we will know, or it's just one of those wait and see things?
Well, the law was just passed this year. So I would hope that over the summer and into the fall that they put the regulations out. And we'll be pressing them, saying, hey, we want to be one of those school systems that does that. They've actually, some of the IAC staff has talked to us already about, hey, why don't you try to do this? We'll help you. So they wanted to be successful too. So hopefully we can work together and get a little more state money out here on our projects than we're already getting.
Thank you.
Dr. Michael also alluded to doing this school versus maybe another project and why this school is important to do. We think this is a one-time opportunity, state funding, to use on helping our infrastructure. We're talking about replacing two of our lowest rated schools. They're both open schools. One of the schools is on septic and well and does not have public utilities. We think the new school will be run much more efficiently with new technology and new HVAC equipment. We think it'll have a lower operating cost. The construction cost of building one versus two schools is much lower. We have the site. All these things lead us down this path of thinking that this is the best use of the money. These schools were built in 1970 and 1975. You could argue that there may be an elementary school here or another school there that might also be worthy of being renovated, and I wouldn't disagree with that. However, these two are in this area, near this site. They're of the age. They need help, just like all our other schools. So we think that this is the one to go for.
And I just want to clarify my caution to the board. All those things that Mr. Rollins just described are all good reasons why we want to do the school we're talking about. And our plan, I think our original plan of this, that school would already be built probably by this point or be under construction. As you recall, we went back and we shared with our local funding agencies our capital improvement plan, and when it wasn't funded, we came back with this plan of consolidating 7 schools into 3 schools, which isn't necessarily desirable from the community school concept, but it was the only way we could see moving forward from a funding standpoint. That now is translated into School 1 being pushed out, School 2, School 3 being pushed out, way out. So my only caution to the board is you're going to have to continue to watch and follow the housing market. You know, if the housing market stays flat, if our projections are correct, maybe this is the right school to build. It'll add some capacity. Hickory is absolutely in need of some help. We are providing 2 portables there next year, which are much needed, not so much from a capacity standpoint. It's just a poorly designed school, open school, poor space. Found Rock's a little less challenged, although to Mr. Rollins' point, we're on septic and well. And again, an open school and its age of the school and things like that. But my caution is, what if this is the only school we're building in the next 10 years? Is it the right school? Is it the right location to address enrollment growth? If enrollment remains flat, this is our highest need based on the needs of those 2 schools. If the enrollment suddenly explodes somewhere, what capacity do we have financially to address this? When we look in the county CIP, it actually identifies the Board of Ed as a funder for this school. I think it's still how it's listed. We may have to change how we do our systemic projects to stretch into the money that the county's providing, that $4 million that they're providing each year, plus their seed money, to make this school a reality. So it's just a big decision when we pull this trigger. Do we see a substantial amount of growth somewhere? I don't think the APFO is at a level right now, or even being implemented at a level that automatically there would be funding for another school if there was suddenly a 1,000-seat development go in somewhere, if we didn't have capacity. Now, it might be we have capacity through redistricting. So mine is all in, 100% agree with what Mr. Rollins just described, but what if this is the only school you're building the next 10 years? It's just a big decision. And we're still a year away or so from this being a final decision. And even once we push away from the dock, start with drawings, things like that, you could still delay and move over to another school project, and it wouldn't be lost money. So I just want to be clear, I 100% support the recommendation, the concept of the 2 schools, the need for those open schools to be renovated, particularly Hickory, is just not I don't know why, acoustics in that building and everything, it's not the students, not the staff, it is just not a well-designed building. It's absolutely in need of help, and we are sending 2 portables. Just when you do this, if it's the only school we're building the next 10 years, where we were building on average a school year or a little bit more than a school year, it's just a big decision, big decision. So my only caution that way. So I just want to be clear, not against our plan, it's a great plan, just we want to make sure when you pull that trigger that is the right thing at the time.
Right, we have to look at it from our standpoint at staff level too, just what we know. We know that these schools need help, and we know they need it right now. If there's enrollment growth in the future, we're not sure whether that's going to happen to some great extent or not. If it does, I think we'd hope that the county would also step up to the plate if they're allowing the growth, that they would also help fund the seats needed for that growth. Might be optimistic on my part, but I hope.
And Mrs. Williams, so I can come back to your question as well about the potentially additional 5%. I think it's not necessarily the competition with the districts that maybe is of concern to me, is that the state still has a finite amount of money, and typically counties work within an allocation. So while we may get more state money allocated to that project, it might be at the risk that there's not money to allocate to another project because we maxed out our allocation because we got an additional 5% funding on this project. So there are some things within that 5% model that just need to be flushed out. There's not a magic new pot of money within state construction to fund additional percentages for counties.
I understand. Thank you, Mr. Pruitt.
So, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I just had a question. Earlier you mentioned that the state might look into how we're operating the school. What does that mean, as in how might they differ or how we operate the schools?
How we operate it mechanically.
Okay,
Not from it has nothing to do with the education side of the house at all. It's all about how we operate the central plant and the cost of operating. Okay? So based on your approval of the CFMP, this is what we'll start doing in the next year. We would have to develop a required memorandum of understanding between the Board of Ed, the Board of County Commissioners, and the Maryland Stadium Authority. Since they are the funders, the Maryland Stadium Authority, they require an MOU. Now, other LEAs have done that. There's some boilerplate out there that we will certainly take a look at and see if it's fits for Washington County, and we'll work with the Maryland Stadium Authority to make that work. The project also might be managed by the Maryland Stadium Authority. We don't know yet. In some counties, they are running the project, and we just oversee and watch them and make sure they do what we need done. However, there is a waiver for that, and we'll seek that to see if we can't run the project on our own. But that remains to be seen, and that'll all be part of the MOU that will be developed. Also, in the next year, we'll start seeking local planning approval from the Interagency Commission on School Construction, that's the IAC. We may have to hire an architect, engineer, do some studies, work on an ed spec, things like that, educational specification, the school's program. So we would dip into the money already seated by the county commissioners to spend on those services as a CIP. We'd also have to develop a feasibility study on the replacement of the schools. That's required by the state. They want to make sure that you're making the right decision when you're closing schools. And we develop a school closing report and recommendation for consideration by the superintendent and the Board of Education. That would be something that the board would have to act on, closing of these schools. We'd also finalize the budget for the future funding request. As you can see, if you add up the numbers on the previous slide, the school's going to cost somewhere around $40 million. That's a lot of money. There has been some reasons for the increase in the cost of schools. One is the cost per square foot is just going up. It went up in the past year $50, almost $50 a square foot. So you can multiply that times 75,000 square foot building, and that's a few $1 million right there. Also, the state has allowed school systems to build larger elementary schools than we used to. They changed the square foot per student that they're allowing themselves to fund. That in its own has increased the footprint of the building from, in days past, it would have been a 70,000 square foot building, and now they're allowing up to, for this student population, a 76,000 square foot building. So that 6,000 square feet costs another few $1 million. We may look at that and say, you know what, we might not need that 6,000 square foot. We're satisfied with the type of elementary schools that we've been building, and we think we can do for less to try to save some money. However, there's a plus and minus to that, because you can also look at it and say, well, no, if the state's going to pay 79 to 84% of that square footage of construction, it makes sense to build larger because they're paying so much of that hall. So those are some of the decisions that we're going to be looking at over the next year and bringing back to the board for consideration as we move down the line on this and try to figure out exactly what we're building and how it looks.
And I think quickly to touch on the school closing report, for those that remember, this would look similar to the closing reports that were done for Winter Street and Conococheague when those schools were closed and Jonathan Hager was opened. They would be contingent upon the opening of the new school. So you're not necessarily putting a finite date on when they would close. It would be contingent on the new school. So perhaps, for those in the community that may not want to see their school close, there may be a silver lining to that closing report in that process.
Right, and also in order to get the state to approve funding, we'd have to notify them that we do plan to close those schools, because otherwise they would want to count the seats as still available. So the intention of the board has to be there to close the schools. Yes, Dan?
Just out of curiosity, all the students who attend Fountain Rock and Hickory are all bused, right? There are no walkers because there are no sidewalks or anything for Hickory,
That's correct.
right?
Correct.
So that won't change the transportation cost essentially that great because they'll all be bused here too.
We don't believe so, yeah.
That would be part of the closing report that we would have to specifically go in and identify.
I have a question. Mr. Rollins, back some time ago, you mentioned that we would need an additional 11 million locally, and that would be for this school?
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes.
So currently, there is a plan, a 5-year plan, I believe, that the commissioners have, where this Washington County Public Schools is to receive $4 million. What's the 5th year of that $4 million in that plan? Are we coming up close to that, or?
They're still showing, I believe, 4 million out into perpetuity,
Infinite.
pretty much, yeah.
Forever.
So and I think we do need to have conversation with the county on the funding model for this school. As Dr. Michael mentioned, they list, I think the number is, I want to say 8 million right now, they list as contribution, which when they list it as contribution from others, it's us. That's who they're indicating when they say contribution from others. Rob's showing that we would allocate some money from the state CIP also to this project. Their 4 million is typically part of their match to the state CIP. So some of that money, some of the 4 million that's allocated would be part of match on the roughly 2 to 4 million we show out of CIP. I would hope that, there's been a lot of discussion at the county level about what may be large surpluses at the end of this fiscal year, that they would take another opportunity to earmark more money to this project out of surplus, the same way they did out of FY21 surpluses, which is where the $4 million seed money came from in the first place. But that's discussion, I think, if the board approves the EFMP and we start pushing away, staff can begin to have conversations with county staff about what that funding model looks like.
Okay. I was trying to follow all of that, and what I'm remembering, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the commissioners have in their capital budget $8 million for a new school. Is that correct? Did I dream that
No,
somewhere?
the $8 million contribution is expected, they're thinking that's coming from the Board of Education.
Oh, they're thinking that's coming from us, not
Correct.
from them.
Correct. When it says
From us.
contribution, I forget the exact terminology, it's contribution or contribution from others. It's not them. It's not the Board of County Commissioners. They're expecting the entity to provide that funding.
Okay, thank you for that correction.
Right, the hope is this funding is outside of the normal CIP process. It's a one-time kind of windfall from the state, and that the county would also treat it the same way.
And the thought is that that would come out of their fund balance, out of their surplus for this one-time
I would hope, and if
construction
we,
project.
I would hope, and if we said, look, we're looking to open a school in 27, 28, where we probably would be seeking more funding in 26, 27, fiscal year 28, we've got 3 or 4 years to build to that number. Let's go out and do it and work on it together.
Thank you.
I guess since we're asking questions, and I'll ask mine. I like the idea of saving money, especially if we're able to do that through the consolidation. But when you save money,
Mr. Evans, could you pull
Oh,
your
sorry.
microphone? Thank you.
so when you do save money, it does come at the expense of someone or something. So my concern is, what impact is this going to have on class sizes? How's that going to look for staff and for students?
I think as we work on a feasibility study, we can flush that answer out better for you. I don't think there's any indication in this closing, in the EFMP and what would come forward in the closing report, that we would see any more than marginal increase in fluctuation in class size up or down one way or the other. The plan would be we utilize all the existing staff. We wouldn't, whatever models we have in place for how we manage class size would be the same moving forward. I don't think there would be a plan in consolidation that say, hey, out of this consolidation, we can cut 3 staff. Places where we would potentially consolidate is between the 2 schools, we have 2 principals, we have an assistant principal. Do we need all 3 administrative staff moving forward? We have 2 full-time secretaries between the 2 buildings. What does that staff look like? Within the food service staff, you're staffing two solely different kitchens. Can we bring some consolidation? No one per se would lose a job. We might, if we found we had savings, we'd be looking at eliminating those savings through attrition. You know, as someone's retiring, that's a position that's not filled, but no one would be like, I'm sorry, we're consolidating these two schools, we don't have a position for you. And I think from a student perspective, I think they would find the same resources. You know, there's always been a concern or a discussion about, you know, small schools, big schools. The fact is the classroom sizes are eerily the same, are depending on, now what we tend to run into in our smaller schools is fluctuations. When you start hitting that bubble, when you start getting to 27, 28, 29 students, now it's 2 teachers. So now I've got classroom sizes of 14 and 15 when I've got other schools at 21, 22, 23. I think you may see, and if you have a situation like that, you may see where those classroom sizes will be more marginalized and normalized across a plane because we can handle accommodations and fluctuations in classroom size better in a larger facility that's 4 and 5 round than we can in a 2-round school. So hopefully that helps long term.
If you get 20 extra students in a grade at a 2-round school, you're going to have 2 classes that are 10 students larger. If you do it in a 4-round school, you're only adding 5 kids per classroom. So the larger school is able to, I think that's what Jeff was saying, it's able to spread it out over more classes.
And then as far as some of the facility savings that you could see, what Mr. Rollins had mentioned earlier, the state has changed their formula. So now they give us 118 square foot per student, whereas back when we built Sharpsburg or Jonathan Hager, they gave us 108 square foot per student. So if we can live with the classrooms we have at Jonathan Hager or Sharpsburg, we don't need that extra 10 square foot per student. However, as we move forward, we may look at it and say, hey, we could really use that extra square footage here, especially if the state's going to pay 80 cents per square foot of that construction cost. So it's some of the things I think as we move forward, we can certainly look at to see, you know, do we want to go with the best we can go with, or can we be a little more frugal and a little more conscientious and make do with what we have?
And I think we'll be seeking the board's input throughout that process.
Right. Thank you.
Absolutely. Going forward through
Let
fiscal
me
year.
ask a question. Does the
Oh, I'm sorry,
county,
Stan.
does the county really pay that much attention to our facilities plan when they do their comprehensive plan? Or is it just something they just don't pay attention to a whole lot?
I don't.
That's a
I'll
loaded
take that.
question, I guess.
I'll take that. We submit to them. We're asked to submit several years out of what we're thinking of doing from a capital perspective. I don't want to speculate in terms of what their discussions are internally, other than to say capital improvement program for the Board of Education is $4 million a year for every year. Over the last number of years, they put forward a capital plan that is $4 million a year for 10 years out. Year drops off, new year comes on at $4 million. And I'll stop there.
Well, what I mean is, we don't bank land for schools. That certainly would be part of their operations, wouldn't it? Because they have to purchase it, right?
They would. The Board of County Commissioners does the land procurements, and I think if that's something that the Board of Ed would like staff to engage the county on, we'd be happy to do so.
Yeah, right now, at $4 million a year, we basically can only do systemic projects with that kind of funding. We have this one-time funding in BTL. We're looking to make a difference on a couple of our really old schools that need help. But we don't have other schools in the plan in the out years because the funding just isn't there. But yes, if we want to put forward a plan in the future that shows new schools again, we would definitely need to start looking at getting land and things like that to move forward. So rounding out the rest of the facility master plan through fiscal year 32, we have 27 additional projects: roof replacements, heating, ventilation, and air conditioning, boilers, electrical distribution, and some window and door replacements. Again, those are all chosen based on the need, the age, and the available funding. The funding that we think will be there to do those projects. So
Mr.
That's our-
Rollins, question? Can you give us a dollar amount in terms of deferred maintenance at this point? Do you have that number anywhere?
I do not. That's in the,
Mrs. Williams, if you'd like, I can get that and share it with the board. It is in the comprehensive maintenance plan, which is presented in the fall, but I could go back to the most recent edition, and I can pull that number and supply that to the board members.
Thank you.
So that is our presentation. Once again, we evaluated everything, but the most important thing to remember is that this plan is updated annually, so anything we approve this year, we can take another look at it next year. We do that every year with these systemic projects. They ebb and flow depending on, sometimes something shows up that we believe has another 5 years on it, and all of a sudden we need to move it forward because it's having problems. And of course, this plan is the basis for our 5-year capital improvement plan. When we come back to you in the fall, seeking approval on the dollars we're asking from the state and local government, it will be based on this EFMP. And I guess we're here for any questions you might have.
Colleagues, we'll open the floor for questions. We've been asking them as we've been going along. Does anyone have a question? Mr. Gupta?
Yes, so about this potential new elementary school, have we approached the county with the idea, or just informally, not officially, and have they had any response toward it?
Yeah. I mean, we have approached the county. The county's aware of the project. They've put, as I stated in there, they put $4 million aside for a built-to-learn project to match the built-to-learn money. So they are fully aware of what we want to do.
It's currently shown in their FY23 CIP as well, to start in FY25. So I think the greatest travesty of this plan, Ms. Rollins failed to allude to, is I started here in 2007, and this is the first year that there's a roof that's shown in the out years that I've already replaced once that came back up. And I remember when I started here, Jeff Haar, worked in our maintenance department, told me, he said, "You're really going to feel old when you start replacing things for the second time." So I see it
I'm
coming.
feeling old.
2007, you say? Any other questions? Dr. Michael, did you have anything that you wanted to say?
I do not. I mean, we'll be requesting the board's approval at the next board meeting, amend the comprehensive maintenance plan on 158 pages. I thought I'd find the deferred maintenance quickly, but probably not as quick as seeing that as I'd like to be.
through it too.
I do see one misspelling we need to correct.
Always a teacher.
But we'll be bringing this to the board. Staff will pretty much just describe it as, facilities master plan for 2022 is described during the work session from May 24th, and be seeking your approval. So you'd be welcome to ask any additional questions that might come up, but this is probably the best opportunity for these questions.
So I have it as June 7th, that it's an action item for approval of this plan?
If that's the date of our board meeting, that'd be correct. If it's the 14th, then it would be June 14th.
And I think I have it as the 7th. Does anyone else have that?
We
Darlene,
we do. Is that the date of the board
Don't we
meeting?
have our meeting?
Yes.
Yeah, we moved that.
Move that meeting to the 14th.
Okay, I'm confused then. I thought that meeting moved to the 14th.
It did.
Correct. I'm sorry.
Staff is good with either date.
We have changed
Yeah,
that.
we're ready. The document's ready, unless you
I
have
thought
any.
I thought I heard you say May 24th as an action item. That's today. And so I have on my paper June 7th. I haven't updated it to the 14th.
Not sure what I said, but what I meant to say is, we'll be presenting at the next board meeting that we're requesting the board's approval of the 2022 Educational Facilities Master Plan as presented on May 24th during the work session.
Gotcha.
Our only deadline is we have to report it to the state by July 1st.
By July 4th. Okay, so June 14th, next board meeting, action item, approval of the Educational Facilities Master Plan. So if there's nothing further, no further questions? Thank you, Mr. Prue. Thank you, Mr. Rollins. Thank you, Mr. Criswell.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Michael. And we will move ahead to our next meeting.